Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is the impact that the Ben & Jerry's ice cream decision to join the BDS movement is having on our greater world. Not just the Jewish world or the world of the lovers of Israel, but on the world itself. Rather than fading away, this decision by the special Ben & Jerry's board is reverberating in surprising ways. Yes, we have discussed this before, but there is much more to discuss. When something happens that defies the normally accepted thought of how that something should happen, it's called counterintuitive. In the fight to defend Israel from BDS, in light of the announcement made by Ben & Jerry's that the ice cream would not be sold in the West Bank and that the company would not renew the license of the current licensee in Be'er Tuvia, Israel, support is coming from people and places that I did not expect. Two groups are taking up the cause and fighting the fight. The first group consists of lovers of Israel. Intuitive, no surprise there. The second group consists of non-Jews and the lawyers, comptrollers, and the heads of state pension funds from many U.S. states. Certainly counterintuitive and very welcome. A very welcome group it is. Lovers of Israel have come out loud and strong and are unabashedly telling the world just how much they value the state of Israel, the Jewish state. They are not, as one might expect, all Jews. They are, however, people with heart and with conscience and with a strong set of principles and values. People like John Katzimatidis. Katz, as he's often called, is the owner, president, chairman, CEO of Gristedes Foods, a grocery chain in New York City, and the Red Apple Group. The company announced that because of the boycott, they were cutting back on Ben & Jerry's, and they are not going to advertise it anymore. And on their Twitter page, John Katzimatidis wrote that he prefers Haagen-Dazs because it's pro-Israel. And then he signed the tweet, which is unusual anyhow. This is the tweet itself. I authorized our stores to cut Ben & Jerry's space by 30% and not advertise until further notice. It's a tragedy that Ben & Jerry's has politicized ice cream. I like Haagen-Dazs better, created by a South Bronx family who is pro-Israel. John Katzimatidis, CEO. Katzimatidis is a big gun in this game. So is Morton Williams, another high-end New York City supermarket. With its name and its look, Morton Williams appears to be a very non-Jewish grocery. But co-owner Avi Kanner is indeed a very proud Jew. He was dumbfounded that Ben & Jerry's would stick their nose into Israeli-Palestinian issues. And in an interview on CBS 2, he said, quote, even the most liberal-minded person who believes in a two-state solution knows ultimately there will be territorial exchanges and swaps. It's not up to Ben & Jerry's as an ice cream company to dictate what the borders should be, unquote. Between Gristedes' 31 stores and Morton Williams' 16 stores, momentum is growing in the fight against Ben & Jerry's. Their parent company, the huge British conglomerate named Unilever, will start to feel the pressure to do the right thing and pull back from the boycott. The biggest powerhouse in terms of the pull and influence here, bigger than supermarket chains, are the various states and their money-laden pension fund investments. They are now demanding answers from Unilever. Ben & Jerry's is a small fry in this game. Unilever is the big fry. The state of New York has over, get this number, $250 billion invested in its pension fund. Of that, $73 million is invested in Unilever. Liz Gordon, executive director of the corporate governance of the New York State Common Retirement Fund, wrote to Unilever CEO Alan Jope demanding an answer within 90 days. In the letter she wrote, and I'm quoting here, Ben & Jerry's, a Unilever wholly owned subsidiary, is involved in BDS activities. The fund views BDS activities as a potential threat to Israel, its economy, and, as a result, the fund's relevant investments. Further, a number of U.S. states have acted or are considering actions to penalize companies that engage in such behavior. As a result, companies that engage in BDS activities may face legal, reputational, and financial risks, unquote. $73 million, and that's just from New York State alone, is a gargantuan investment to lose for Unilever. Florida turned up the heat on Unilever as well. State CFO Jimmy Petronas controls Florida's pension funds also. He sent his letter to Ben & Jerry's CEO Matthew McCarthy. This letter explained that Ben & Jerry's decision to boycott, quote, may result in your business being placed on Florida's scrutinized companies that boycott Israel list pursuant to Florida statutes. As you may know, Florida law prohibits the state from investing in companies that discriminate against Israel by refusing to deal with or terminate business activities in a discriminatory manner, unquote. Petronas explained that if Ben & Jerry's is added to the state's list, both Ben & Jerry's and Unilever will be barred from entering into or renewing contracts with the state. This is just the beginning. Pressure is being brought to play on Unilever. More and more U.S. states are joining in. Unilever needs to rethink their contract with Ben & Jerry's and their independent board. Ultimately, Unilever is responsible for Ben & Jerry's. It's as simple as that, not the independent board. CEOs are fired for losing much less money than the sums at risk and for the bad, terrible, I would say, publicity that has been generated by this independent decision made by this independent board. So far, Unilever's CEO has not distinguished himself in this frontal attack against Israel. Coming up next, points of view. First up is an editorial from the New York Daily News. I don't often take pieces from the Daily News for numerous reasons, but this was a very important piece. The Daily News is owned by Mort Zuckerman. The editorial actually indicates that it was penned by the editorial board, so there should be no misunderstanding about it. The column discusses, or the editorial discusses, Ben & Jerry's. The editorial is entitled, Freezer Burn. After attacking Israel, Ben & Jerry's is going to get its just desserts. There's a pun there, obviously. There are several puns in the piece. The Daily News editorial board, New York Daily News. It was published on Monday, July 26, 2021. This is how it begins. Peace, love, and ice cream is the motto of Ben & Jerry's. All was sweet and good when they stuck to flavors like fish food and sponsored Free Cone Day, Happy Cows, and all that. Even conservatives could still love Chunky Monkey despite Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield having long mixed in their hippy-dippy Vermont lefty politics, supporting this or opposing that. After all, even ice cream salesmen have free speech. But now they are acting, having signed on to the anti-Israel boycott, divest, and sanction movement, ending all sales in occupied Palestinian territory, in which they're including Jerusalem's Jewish quarter. The Daily News now explains that the parent company Unilever does not want this to happen. The Daily News continues, the brand, a part of the UK-based global giant Unilever, has dropped their Israeli distributor and says they are seeking a new one who will abide by their boycott of the West Bank and East Jerusalem. That's not going to happen. So while the Holy Land will have milk and honey, it won't have chocolate therapy. Very pleased are the BDS crowd, Israel haters, and assorted anti-Semites. But it's an ice cream headache for Unilever, despite its pledge to remain fully committed to our presence in Israel, where we have invested in our people, brands, business for several decades. Now, Daily News moves on to the United States State Department and the reaction of the state of New York. They write, the Biden State Department has rightly reiterated its denunciation of BDS. American stores are yanking Ben & Jerry's off shelves. There are calls for bans in state after state, from Texas to Florida. New York State Controller Tom DiNapoli, the sole trustee of the pension fund, with more than $250 billion in assets, has written Unilever with a financial warning that the conglomerate could be placed on the fund's list of companies participating in BDS activity. No firm should want to be on that very naughty list. The Daily News now concludes with a pun. DiNapoli, who likes ice cream as much as anyone, is right that Unilever's Vermont subsidiary is moving into a bad place with its own bottom line. You play with boycotts, you might get boycotted. You play with fire, you might get burned or frozen out. The Daily News is 100% correct, and I'm glad to see that they took a stand on this issue, because many have not. Next up is a column that appeared in Al Jazeera. It's co-written by Rabbi Abraham Cooper, Associate Dean of the Simon Wiesenthal Center in LA, and Reverend Johnny Moore, President of the Congress of Christian Leaders and a Commissioner on the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom. They wrote a piece asking that the Iranian gold medal winner in shooting be arrested and stripped of his medal. This piece is entitled, "An Iranian Killer Won an Olympic Gold Medal. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is complicit if it stands idle." It appeared July 28, 2021. This is how they begin. It took the International Olympic Committee 49 years to finally remember 11 Israeli athletes murdered by Palestinian terrorists at the 1972 Munich Olympic Games. It took just one day for the IOC to tarnish the 2020 Games in Tokyo. Remembering those Israelis killed a half a century ago with a moment of silence provided a rare moment of moral clarity for an International Olympic Committee that has been playing catch-up since they handed Adolf Hitler global legitimacy in 1936. And they are about to provide Chinese President Xi such a coveted prize in 2022, despite the genocide of the Uyghurs. The IOC defenders could claim that they act based on discussions, international deliberations, and consensus, and that sometimes they just get it wrong. That is history. Now the authors explain what happened this week. The column continues. But an event took place on the gold medal stand this weekend is so outrageous, so despicable, that the IOC must reverse it. The IOC must immediately revoke a gold medal awarded to Iranian Olympian Javad Foroughi. Then, they should ask Japanese authorities to immediately demand Interpol issue a warrant for his arrest. When Javad Foroughi knocked off his competitors to win the gold in shooting, he caught the attention of activists, including us. It was a dystopian moment. What most viewers missed is how Foroughi refined his exquisite and unmatched skills. Like other members of the Basij militia, a foreign terrorist group affiliated with Iran's International Revolutionary Guards Corps, the IRGC, Foroughi likely honed his craft during Syria's civil war, where Syrian civilians, including women and children, were often and intentionally put in the crosshairs of live bullets. Foroughi isn't ashamed of his service to the Iranian regime, nor is anyone even trying to hide it. Iran boasted of his service on state TV, where Foroughi actually confessed his greatest honor in life was to fight on behalf of Iran's genocidal, Holocaust-denying leader, Ayatollah Khomeini. Treating Foroughi like any other athlete is an Olympic-sized affront to the families and friends of all the innocent victims, dead and maimed, of the Iranian regime and its terrorist lackeys. Authors Cooper and Moore conclude their piece, imploring us to teach our children values. And one of those values should be that terrorists do not get Olympic medals. It's as simple as that and very clear. This is how Moore and Cooper conclude. People across the globe are right to ask what more the godfather of terrorism in Tehran has to do before the world says enough. We submit it may start with disqualifying a child-killing Iranian terrorist from the Olympic Games, and that Javad Foroughi be arrested as an international war criminal. Can we at least teach our children that there should be no gold medals for terrorists? Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 6 cartoons and memes today, and we have a theme. The theme is the return of the mask. First is a video. It's self-explanatory and simply hilarious and needs no introduction.
Arreglado.
Next up is a sad description of a mask coming back. And a dark cloud hovers above. Indeed, a very dark cloud does hover above the idea that we are now masking again. The cartoon reads, "I'm back," as it identifies the mask on the ground. The next cartoon reads, "Back to the future. A person is putting on their mask. Others are wearing their masks." The next cartoon depicts a couple out to eat. They're toasting a return to normal. In the background is a huge wrecking ball of resurgence. These next two cartoons poke fun at the mask-related violence now happening on planes. In the first cartoon, a flight attendant uses a blowgun to shoot a tranquilizer dart into the neck of an unruly passenger. The cartoon reads, "That de-escalated quickly." The final cartoon is in an airport. The flight board actually reads and lists the reasons for the flight delays. The board reads, melee, unruly drunk, fist fight, anti-masker, scuffle, spoiled Karen, rowdy moron, brawl. Nobody is happy about returning to masking, but when we allow ourselves to laugh about it, something at least eases the pain. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israel loves sports, and Israelis love the Olympics. They also love to win and get medals. What country doesn't? Hearing the Hatikva, Israel's national anthem, being played while an Israeli stands on the winner's podium makes every Israeli's chest swell with pride. And every Jew who loves Israel, anyone who loves Israel. It almost makes it feel as if all the bad press Israel's bombarded with is actually worth it, especially when Israel has just won a gold. Artem Dolagpiat won the gold medal in artistic gymnastics, the floor exercise. The win was impressive. Artem was impressive. Israel's president called Israel's athlete, the star athlete, and congratulated him. President Herzog said, "We are all very excited, and I congratulate you. We are looking forward to seeing you in Jerusalem soon. You are a source of pride to many children who will surely follow in your footsteps." Dolagpiat told Herzog that he did it all, quote, "for the people of Israel," unquote, and expressed his happiness that all of our nation watched me during the final, unquote. In his call to Artem after the win, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett said, "You made history here. We stopped the cabinet meeting in the middle to congratulate you for bringing us this great news. On behalf of the government of Israel, on behalf of the citizens of Israel, we are all proud of you and look forward to your return to Israel for celebrations," unquote. Bennett and the members of his cabinet had interrupted their weekly Sunday morning cabinet meeting to watch the floor performance and the win. This is the second gold medal for Israel in the history of their participation in the Olympic Games. In Israel, people disagree over politics, but they are united in their national pride. Israel is beginning a third round of vaccinations for people over the age of 60. The decision to vaccinate was made in order to avoid a fourth countrywide lockdown. In the televised press conference, Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett told Israelis, "Our goal is to keep the state of Israel open, but we must understand that there is a race between the vaccine campaign and the pandemic. We must make sure the vaccinations rate beats the pandemic's spread. We all have the shared obligation to protect one another. Go get vaccinated." Israel's President Isaac Herzog, who turned 61 in September, was the first Israeli to receive the booster shot as part of the campaign. Bennett said that he will accompany his 78-year-old mother, Myrna, when she gets her jab. The Prime Minister explained the efficacy of the third dose, saying, "Within a few days of receiving the third dose, the vaccine comes into effect and provides protection. I urge seniors who have been vaccinated with the second dose, Go get vaccinated with the third dose. It will protect you from serious illness and death. The essential point that he was making here is that you may get sick, but with the vaccine, you're not going to die. And that is what is important. And if this campaign works, as Israel is hoping, the country will not need to shut down. And that means the economy can continue to rebuild itself and grow once again. To answer the most asked question, tourism will not spring back up right now. Open borders are not immediately on the agenda. An Israeli tanker flying a Liberian flag that was part of an Israeli billionaire Eyal Ophir's maritime group called Zodiac was attacked just north of the Omani island Masira. That puts it about 185 miles from Muscat, the capital of Oman. The ship is actually Japanese-owned, leased by Zodiac, and registered in Liberia. Although owned by Ophir, an Israeli, Zodiac is actually a British-based registered company. 2 crew members were killed in the attack. One British, he was a security guard, and one Romanian, he was a crew member. This attack has international implications. It was perpetrated by a drone, and Israel asserts with absolute certainty that the attacker was Iran. In an official statement, the management of Zodiac Maritime called the attack piracy. The statement read, "At the time of the incident, the vessel was in the northern Indian Ocean, traveling from Dar es Salaam to Fujairah, with no cargo on board." In other words, the ship was making its way from a port in Tanzania to a port in the United Arab Emirates. Israel will certainly respond to this attack because there were deaths and one of the crew members killed was British. England may join Israel in the response. We will wait and watch and see. We need a new policy towards Iran. That should be clear. The Western world, especially the United States and Israel, need to change their attitude and realize what Iran is really doing. Historically, radical regimes like Iran have perceived reality differently than the West. And because of that perception and that difference in perception, they invest in their country very differently than the West would or another regime would. In Iran's case, despite terrible economic and internal crisis after crisis after crisis, Iranian leadership is channeling huge amounts of money not into their own country, but into aggressive actions in Syria against the United States and against Israel. They're doing this in an effort to strike Israel and the United States. It is counterintuitive when it comes to Western logic, but Iran, it makes sense there. Iranian leadership is trying to deflect attention from internal crisis and place blame on the United States and Israel for their problems internally. Iran is solving problems internally by attacking what they perceive as the root causes, the United States and Israel, which are outside Iran. The United States and Israel needs to focus and push back hard against Iran. The entire region and Iran will be better off when internal issues are addressed in Iran. Iran needs to be forced back and to face inward. We do not dedicate enough time to good news, especially good news about the great contributions Israel has made to the world. Here's one example. Israeli technology is being used in the Dominican Republic to diagnose early stages of cervical cancer. The test will save the lives of many women who are diagnosed early. The name of the Israeli company that developed this technology is Mobile ODT, and they launched a nationwide program in the Dominican Republic testing 50,000 women. The artificial intelligence-based kit allows non-specialists to diagnose abnormal cervical findings in their early stages using an ordinary smartphone. The patient is then matched with adequate preventive treatments. This test has checked already through the phone. 18,000 of those women who were tested were very modest means specifically, and the early detection would both save their lives and cut the cost of treatment exponentially. Danny Biran, Israel's ambassador to the Dominican Republic, noted that Israeli technology can reach anywhere in the world, make essential health services accessible to everyone, and present fast results, and above all, save lives. He said, continued, "We will continue to work on a variety of issues in the field of groundbreaking and life-changing Israeli technologies, together with Israel's great friend, the Dominican Republic. The world could use more good news of this sort, that's for sure." Israel's Ministry of Environmental Affairs froze a deal with the United Arab Emirates. The ministry explained that their actions were done because the standards Israel requested to protect the environment were not met by UAE, and until they are, the deal is frozen. The deal was that the UAE would ship oil by tanker to the port of Eilat. From Eilat, a pipeline would take the oil inland to the port of Ashkelon, where it would be shipped to Europe. The pipeline was called the Med-Red Land Bridge. It was a product of the joint Emirati-Israel company called the Med-Red Land Bridge Limited Company. Work on the pipeline has not yet begun, so the oil would have to have been trucked. Details and safety aspects of the pipeline have not been made public. Therefore, the courts found that the safety of the environment was not guaranteed, and the deal was frozen. This may push the parties to act quickly and responsibly to build that pipeline safely. Russia is convinced that the new U.S. administration disapproves of Israel's bombing in Syria, and that opens the door for Russia to arm Syria to protect itself from Israel. It appears through certain Arabic press sources in London that Russia wants to stop Israel's bombing of Syria and the terror targets there. To end that, Russia will supply Syria with better surface-to-air missile systems. The anonymously sourced report by the London-based Ashak al-Awsat cited a well-informed Russian official saying that the Kremlin has run out of patience with Israeli air raids in Syria. Israel's objectives are clear: to prevent Iran from gaining a permanent military foothold on its doorstep and stop them from heavily arming Hezbollah. Russia, a key supporter of the Assad regime, has built a strong military presence in Syria. Israel needs to step in and diplomatically stop this. And the way to do that is by going directly to the top, to Putin. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that the word boycott has a very interesting origin? Boycott is named from an Irishman named Charles Boycott. He was the agent of an absentee landlord, Lord Ernie, in Low Mask House in Ireland. And this took place in the year 1880. It was a year with very poor rainfall. Crops and harvests were even poorer, and the tenants did not have enough money to pay their rent. Lord Ernie reduced their rent by 10%, but the tenants wanted a 25% reduction. Boycott had already evicted 11 people and had taken their fields for delinquency in paying rent. The tenants band together to isolate Boycott and his workers. It took a while, but their efforts were successful. The tenants refused to deliver mail or work the fields until Boycott met their demands and changed his policy. And eventually he did. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.